Hey there, card folk. Speedrobo here. Today we are going to be talking about the most common forms of mana systems found in card games. We will be examining each one to talk about the strengths and weaknesses of each system. Let's jump right in. When it comes to card games, you will need to make some way for players to pay for cards. If you don't, there's basically going to be no way to balance your game. A great example of the problems of not having a resource system can be found in early Yu-Gi-Oh! Just take a look at all these different spell cards. With no system in place to pay for card effects, you wind up with a misbalanced mess of effects. There are three main types of resource systems found in games: turn counter systems, stockpile systems, and damage as resource systems. The most common system is the turn counter system. This method was pioneered by Magic the Gathering. Once per turn, you get to play one land card, which is used to pay for costs. In addition, your land refreshes each turn. This means that, in general, you will get resources to play cards equal to the number of turns you have had. What makes this system so good is that it gives the game a steady sense of progression. Players grow stronger the longer the game takes. And that can feel really good. From the designer's side, this means that you will always know at what turn a card you are making can be played. Don't want a certain card to show up before the late game? Well, just give it a large cost. Problem solved. The downside to this kind of system is that it's the least interesting of the possible systems. It's linear, without much room for deviation. This can result in predictable feeling games, as each game will always have a similar pace to it. While this can be a strength, it's also, well, boring. As a side note, never ever create dedicated land cards to go in the main deck. It's just bad game design. If you want to learn more on that, go watch my Mistakes in Magic the Gathering video. I go into great detail about Magic's specific mana system. If you are interested in creating this kind of resource system for your game, use Hearthstone or Force of Will as a template. The next resource system to talk about is the Stockpile System. In this system, players will be granted a certain number of points to spend on costs each turn. Unlike the turn counter system, these points do not refresh once spent, and they carry over from turn to turn. This means that you can stockpile your points to spend on one giant burst turn, or spend the points you are given each turn to play smaller cards. A good example of this system is Future Card Buddy Fight and how it handles Gauge. Other example games are Zatchbell the Card Battle and Card Battle Spirit Link. What makes this system so much fun is that it's incredibly dynamic. Figuring out how many points you will need, not just for this turn, but for the next turn, and the next, and so on, is incredibly fun and strategic. However, there is a downside. This is the most volatile system as well. As a player, it can be hard to predict how many points you will need for those future turns, and this can lead to frustration and feelings of the game being unfair. It can result in cards meant for the late game being slammed down on turn 1. When designing a game with a system like this, you should always plan for all of your cards getting turboed out into play on turn 1. This means that some design space does get killed off, as you can't really make dedicated late game cards using just your cost system alone. A side note is that games such as 2020 Digimon use a variant on the stockpile system. The points you get at the start of your turn are determined by how many points your opponent spent last turn. This is a very interesting system, and most of what I said about stockpile systems apply here. However, this system comes with its own unique drawback. High-cost cards will generally never see play. Why? It's simple. Since your opponent can only use the number of points you give them, it's almost always better to plan to give your opponents as few points as possible. Therefore, if they have chosen to run high-cost cards in their deck, you are basically locking them out of being able to put those cards into play. The final system we're going to look at is the damage as resource style system. The best example for this game is Cardfight Vanguard and its Counterblast. What makes this system so cool is how it pre-builds in a comeback mechanic. The harder you are hit, the more you can do. Pretty cool. However, the drawback should be fairly obvious. It gives your opponent control over what you can do. Your opponent can simply stall the game out and not give you the resources you need. In addition, some games run into the problem of the resource being too valuable. This means that attacking your opponent is just a bad tactical decision. A damage as resource system is by far the trickiest to implement correctly, as it's very easy as the designer to overcorrect and make your comeback mechanic far too strong, resulting in your card game feeling more like a game of chicken than a game of strategy. That's all for this episode of Exploring Card Game Design. If you enjoyed this adventure, give it a like, and consider subscribing to the channel. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comments below. I'm always happy to hear what you have to say. I've been Speedrobo, and I'll see you later.